This is not half power. Okay? You might think you've got your volume halfway up, so you're at half power, and that really is not the case. Same with this here. This is not half power. Yeah? This point here, this 12 o'clock position, halfway up the volume knob. So you might call it half volume. But is it half volume? Well, no. And this is a constant mistake which, well, I won't say it drives me mad. It doesn't surprise me at all because this stuff doesn't make a lot of sense until someone explains it to you. So I shall attempt to explain it to you. Now, I'm not using a whiteboard. I'm going to wave my hands and we'll see how that goes. So if you're playing an instrument, you play a note and some millivolts come out. It's not a lot, but we'll just call that a very small amount of power. I'm not going to get into the technical. This is an oversimplification because if I start talking about complicated stuff and logarithms and decibels and stuff like that, everyone will turn off, and I want this to be an accessible video so it makes sense to you. So just like in chemistry when people learn about electron rings and not quantum shells and stuff like that when you're younger, this is an oversimplification. It's not the truth, but it is more true than what most of you think about this. So you play a note and some sound comes out, and then this knob here, this happens to have a pre-gain and a post-gain. This knob here, let's ignore the post-gain, is a multiplier, yeah? So this multiplies what's going into it. And then for the simplicity's sake, we will call this another multiplier. In reality, usually the main multiplier is fixed and hidden inside, and this is an attenuator before a bigger multiplier. But just a simpler way to think of it is this is a multiplier and this is a multiplier. So if you put 1 in and this multiplies it by 10, you get 10 out from that. And then if this multiplies it by 10, you get 100 out. So let's imagine, so this amp is a 600 watts power output, RMS into 4 ohms. So let's say you put 6 in and this multiplies it by 10 and then this multiplies it by 10, you get 600. That's full power. Now, where it gets confusing is the fact of the matter is that when you turn this changes your multiplication factor. So does this, okay? But also what comes in matters because you're multiplying what goes in. If you've got everything cranked up and then you hit the mute on your tuner pedal if you've got a tuner pedal, or you just don't play a note, so you mute your strings, then no power comes out of your amp, even if everything is turned all the way up. Even if you turn up everything, if you don't play a note, nothing comes out. No sound, no power, yeah? If we turn it down, then you can imagine that less sound will come out. But what happens if you play louder? What happens if you're a really loud player or you're playing a loud instrument with hot pickups, with a lot of output, you're playing through a pedal that gives you extra boost, then you're putting more in. So these are not telling you the level, they're telling you how much you're multiplying at that stage. Same on this one, this is a valve one, but it's all the same sort of stuff. You've got these circuits, some of them which use active multipliers, some of them which use passive attenuators, and then active gain stages that are fixed gain afterwards. But that is how this stuff works. The reason we tend to have multiple knobs is because we're taking very small signal levels and multiplying them a lot. So, you know, microphones are really tiny, passive guitars are pretty tiny, passive bass is pretty tiny, active a bit louder, but they're not at line levels at, like, say, a CD player or the output of a mixing desk or something like that, which you can then take straight into a power amplifier and just turn up. So they tend to be, you know, 1/10 of that or 100th of that. So having multiple gain stages helps reduce noise and helps reduce, well, it basically makes life easier for us as amp designers to make a product that is easier for you to use. It's pretty hard to deal with the amount of gain possible from a guitar amp with just one knob. I mean, we have we have stuff that only has master volumes, and we all know that they are more challenging to deal with. You sort of no master volume sort of guitar amps being the classic example, the sort of things that just need to be cranked to get your tone happening. So yeah, it's a multiplier. So people will often email me and I'll be like, well, what do you use at the moment and how's it getting on? They'll be going, well, I'm not using that much power because, I only turn it up halfway. Well, and so they're thinking, well, I'm only using 150 watts out of 300 watts on my 300 watt amp because it's only up halfway, but it's a multiplier. I mean, if they're not playing any sound into it at all, then no power's coming out. But if they're playing really loud, then that amp could be reaching full power easily at half volume. And I'll tell you why this is. There's two factors to it. One, a kind of practical engineering thing, and the other one, a marketing thing. So we've been designing a barefaced amp forever, it seems like. We started on the electronic innards in earnest in 2017, so yeah, it has been a long time. It's going to be really good. And the thing I realised with that is, what happens if someone comes to you with a bass that's very low output? And the classic issue, even if you've got a gain and a master volume, say we put a light on the front that lights up when you clip the input gain. You wouldn't tend to see this on any sort of guitar amp, but you will see this on bass amps where people are hunting for a clean sound. And you might get someone who plays really loud, plays really hard, digs in hard, whilst adjusting the gain to make sure that the amp's not clipping. So they turn this, in this case of this one, I think, yeah, this one's got a clip light there, so input overload. So they turn this, down and down and down because they've been slapping really hard, for instance, or smashing the bass hard one way or another. And the input light's now not overloading on the very loudest notes. And then when they actually start playing, they play much softer. And they never really dig in like that. At which point, they're not going to adjust this because they're like, well, I've set that for the perfect clean sound, maximum headroom, etc., etc. So then they start turning the master volume up. And because they're putting a quieter signal in and they're not using much multiplication here because they didn't want this overloading, they have to keep turning the master volume up. And what we do not want to end up with as amp designers is a situation where someone has basically set the input gain incorrectly because of this technique of testing it with a very loud note but then not actually playing very hard, and then finding that they can't actually get the amp to go loud enough. They're turning the master volume up and it's gone all the way, and the problem is they're gain staging, but we don't want to have to deal with someone ending up in this situation because they don't know about this. So what we do is we make sure that the master volume has enough gain range on it that even if you haven't set that particularly optimally, the input gain, you'll still be able to get full power. And as I say, full power could happen when that's all the way to max, or it could happen when it's much lower. The other thing that manufacturers do, and this was what used to bug me as a purchaser before I started an amp company, was that if you put two amps side by side in a shop, someone will plug in and they will inevitably be like, well, this amp is loud, so loud at, say, 10 o'clock, but the other amp is only loud enough, the same loudness at 2 o'clock. So they're like, well, if this one is louder when the volume knob is lower, then this is a more powerful amp. And on the face of it, that seems very obvious and logical. Now, we know, you know now, if you've got this far, that isn't true because this gain stage is a multiplier. It doesn't tell you when the amp's actually going to run out of power. It's just a multiplier. So, yeah, I suppose the way to look at it, probably should have used the whiteboard, but basically, if this is the maximum output from your amp, and this is your input level coming in, and then your gain stage is saying, well, it's going to multiply that up a certain distance that's a multiple of the original distance. So say you've got a step like that, it can multiply it to a step that high, and then your master's another multiplier of that. And there's always going to be a limit that is the maximum output of the amp. That's where the amp runs out of power. So those knobs, your volume knobs, gain knobs, post volume, post gain, master volume, whatever they're called, they are in effect multipliers, and you can't multiply the signal past the maximum your amp can put out. But you have to have a signal in at the front to get an output out, and the output you get is going to vary depending on what you put in and then what it's multiplied by. Hopefully that makes sense. Do let me know if it has enlightened you or not. And there will be more to come on this where we'll delve into it a bit more deeply, and I might even use the decibel word again. Or God forbid wattage, because it's not, it's power. So thank you, I've been Alex from Bareface, and hopefully that has demystified some stuff about the joys of gain staging and the fact that half volume is not half volume.